Hey there everybody, welcome back to another narrated ride video. In this video I'm going to give you guys my very first impressions of the Bombtrack Hook adventure. I literally just came back from the trail a couple hours ago, downloaded the footage, and am recording the voiceover. So my first impressions are nice and fresh, and I can kind of communicate what I think of this bike so far. So this bike, a little bit on the controversial side. You'll notice it's got some squish here in the front. It's a short travel air suspension fork. I think it has about 40 millimeters of travel, so not full-on mountain bike, something in between. And I think that's what really confuses people. You know, is this a gravel bike? Is this a mountain bike? I think in Bombtrack's own words, they say that they're taking everything they love about the 90s mountain bike and putting it into a drop bar package. So there's lots of things on this bike that are completely new to me, like a dropper post. I've never used a dropper post before. I've heard that they're super useful in technical downhills, but I'm a complete noob. We'll see how I do. I wasn't even exactly sure where to put the little lever. I mean, is this where you put the lever for a dropper post on a drop bar bike? I looked it up on the web, and there were kind of lots of different placements, from in the hooks to on the top of the bars. I kind of settled with that position just because it seemed easiest. The drivetrain is 1x FSA cranks. The controls are SRAM Rival hydraulic. I found the gearing pretty adequate for the terrain here. It would probably be a little bit undergunned if you're going to take this full-on bike packing, but for a day ride, it seems pretty awesome. The bike is 27.5, and it's shod with these WTB Ranger tires that come in at 2.25 inches. For tire pressure, I'm running about 25 psi in the front and 28 in the rear. So enough of that. Let's actually hop on the bike and ride. So again, for those of you that might not know, I'm based in Missoula, Montana. So I'm going to ride a trail. I'm riding a trail system in the Lincoln Hills here. And it starts off, like with everything, with a pretty good climb. Prior to this, I did a bit of a road climb to get to this trailhead, and I think I'm going to ultimately climb about 1,200, 1,300 feet before I get to descend. I will warn you guys now that I'm a pretty newbie mountain biker. I've never had a chance to live in an area where there was quick access to mountain biking, so it wasn't a skill that I've developed. So I'm pretty cautious this descender. It's not going to look like anything like BKXC would do, or Singletrack Sampler, or those guys. So just bear with me. I'm a noob. I'm going to be kind of under biking on these trails, although, you know, in the grand scheme of things, they're pretty approachable. It's just I'm still developing my skill set. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how the bike handles. For me, one of the things I actually really like about this bike is it climbs fairly well. And that's kind of important because there's a lot of climbing in this area before you get to go downhill. The chain stays are a little bit on the shorter side. I believe the length is 425, and I feel like you definitely feel that. You know, it feels like you're actually climbing and not slowly winching your way up. I was just messing around with the suspension there. I think I turned it on just because it gets a little rough here. During the road climb portion, which I didn't film, it felt reasonably efficient. I mean, it felt like it climbed pretty well. There was some kind of pedal bobbing even when I tried to lock out the fork completely, so there is some movement even in its firmest setting. So it's something that you would just have to live with this bike. So in terms of the front end handling, I didn't calculate the trail, but what I felt was that it's actually a little bit more responsive than I would have thought. It's not super slack. I feel like in some ways the crust bike in the front end was a lot slacker than this. So overall, it's a fairly lively ride. So if that's the kind of ride that you're looking for, then you know it's probably a bike that would work for you. I know that there's lots of controversy around this style of bike, and for me, I felt the same in the past. You know, that front suspension is just overkill for a gravel road, and I still stick to that, but I'm keeping my mind open on this ride, just trying to suss out the bike. You know, if I didn't have the, you know, pre-existing baggage of what a gravel bike was supposed to feel like, what a mountain bike was supposed to feel like, you know, is this bike fun? And that's kind of what I'm thinking about when I'm riding all bikes, actually. Is it fun? So did I mention that there was lots of climbing in this area? I think I popped the camera off for a hot second to show you guys kind of how much we've climbed so far, a little bit of the terrain. And that's kind of why I actually mention the climbing, how a bike climbs often in the videos, just because there is a lot of climbing that has to be done where we live. We're in the valley, so you got to go up and over a lot of things to get to different places. I have to say, this bike, from just a climbing perspective, exceeded my expectations. You do feel the weight of the shock. It's kind of hard to deny. I think I haven't quite weighed the bike, but it's definitely in the upper 20s. But because of that shorter rear end, it does feel fairly efficient. And look, there's even more climbing. Big surprise. As you guys can see, I am rocking the gravel casual floopy flappy, even though I'm sweating up the hill. This is kind of a precarious time in this part of the country, just because it's hot. We're getting lots of thunderstorms, and the thunderstorms are causing lots of fires. I don't know if you guys can tell, but there's like just a tinge of smoke, and it's a bummer. It's definitely the start of the fire season, and I'm trying to get out there as much as I can, ride these bikes, film them, do these reviews before the smoke gets really, really bad. Okay, so we're about, I'd say, 7/8 of the way to the top. I pull over here and show you guys a little bit of the valley. So that little double track there is what we were climbing a couple of minutes ago. And out there is the city of Missoula. It's pretty amazing that, this is quite literally outside our, back door. And we're definitely trying to, take advantage of the fact that it exists, that the weather is not snowing and it's not super smoky at the moment. Okay, so that was the sound of me running out of gears. We're hitting this last steep little bit. I think it goes excess of 14, 16%. It's not too, it's got adequate gearing. I'm definitely having to put some body English into the climb, as you can see. But from here, I'm going to turn off. The trail I'm riding is a trail that's called Sound of Music, and it's so called because in the spring, if you ride it when just at the right time, there are all these wildflowers to the left and the right of you, and it's like the movie Sound of Music. Yay! Finally, we're on to some Singletrack. This is a really short level section before, you guessed it, we climb a little bit more. I think I was fudging with the shocks there. For the most part, during the climb, I've kept it locked out. There is some movement in there, so you do get a little bit of suspension, even at its firmest setting. But this is the last bit of climb before we get to the top. And so far, super stoked on the bike from a climbing perspective. I've ridden this trail with many bikes, from the Jones bike to the Cutthroat to the Warbird to even the Soma Wolverine. I took that up here. And I'm going to say, out of all those bikes, I think this bike actually handled it best. There's some good grip in suspension from the 2.25 inch tires and the front suspension fork. It's a little bit lighter than the Jones bike. I feel like this drop bar position for me is a way more efficient climbing position than the flat bar bike, unless it gets super technical and steep, which I guess this kind of is at the moment. But so far so good. Stoked on this bike going uphill. It's probably not everyone's cup of tea. But, I had a lot of, preconceptions, maybe some prejudices against having a full front squish fork on a quote-unquote gravel bike. But in this particular build, I'm actually enjoying it quite a bit. So here I am. I'm hoofing up the Singletrack almost to the top. Just when you think you're almost done, there's a little bit more climbing. But this bike is handling it like a champ. Again, the stock gearing on the bike, if you're unloaded and going out for a day ride, then I think it's pretty good. But I think I would definitely be walking if I had any kind of bike packing gear on this trail at the moment. It just doesn't get low enough. So, that's one of the trade-offs of doing one by. You can kind of optimize it for a particular style of riding, but I think it's a bit of a stretch to say a one by system is perfect for all types of riding. I just don't see it happening. So almost to the top here, almost to the top. Yeah, lots of climbing. I think I'm a better climber in this instance than a descender, as you guys shall soon see. Yay, we made it. I'm going to give you guys a super quick beauty shot just to see how far we've gone up. Some pretty sweet views. Nice that it's not too smoky yet. But yeah, so that's Missoula. This is the bike. And let's start going downhill. Okay, so I want to, again, set your expectations here. I'm not going to be shredding the gnar. I'm going to be slightly stirring it. Again, noob mountain biker, just still getting used to the trails and kind of all the nuances of riding single track off-road, which I think is like completely different from pave riding. I don't think pave riding sets you up for the same kind of challenges. So I'm futzing with the dropper post here. Again, my first time using it, so trying to figure out like where it makes sense, how much I want to drop it. Sorry the camera angle is a little bit low. I do adjust it. I remember thinking initially I had the saddle completely out of the way, and it felt a little strange to not have anything to kind of rest my thigh on. So I did bring it up, but I do eventually get to a part where I lower it a little bit more, and so I can get behind the saddle. So Sound of Music is a green trail, so not too many technical features, no huge drops or jumps or anything. There are kind of a handful of bank berms, but not too many of them. So it's actually a pretty good trail for a noob like me. I can get down. I'm not doing it with too much flair or too much speed, but it's just something I'm accepting as a matter of time and practice. Okay, so at this point, the shocks are fully open in their squishiest mode, and I'm pretty much loving it at this point. I've descended this trail with bikes like the Warbird and the Cutthroat, and riding those on this trail, you feel like you're underbiking it. Riding this trail with this bike, it feels just right. Maybe slightly underbiking it. Again, depending on your skill. If you're a very skilled mountain biker, then this is just like a piece of cake on anything. But as a noob, it does give me a little bit more confidence. I didn't feel like I was being tossed around like a rag doll, because there was the front suspension to take some of those bigger hits, and also the tires provided a lot of grip. There were a couple of sandy parts where I had to take it kind of slow just so I wouldn't lose traction in the front wheel. But overall, have to say I'm pretty stoked on this bike for trails like these. I know a lot of you are going to be asking, why not just get a mountain bike? And it's a valid point. I think a cross-country bike would be probably more appropriate for this trail. But I think with this bike, because it is a drop bar bike, and it's not full squish, it makes trails like this a little bit more exciting. So I think if you live in an area where the trails are fairly mellow, but you want to kind of challenge yourself or just want to have some sideways fun, then this bike is definitely a way to do that. Also, I think where this bike makes sense is I actually think it speaks to me quite a bit, because I don't see myself as a full-on mountain bike bro, but I would like to benefit from some of the advantages of wider tires, some front suspension sometimes, and this bike fits the bill. It's kind of like a mountain bike for a kind of more road-oriented cyclist that doesn't want to take the full leap into mountain biking. I know for me personally, I prefer a drop bar just because of the hand position. When I ride a bike with a flat bar, it really aggravates my carpal tunnel. I can't do it for very long. So this is actually a more comfortable descending position for me. So there I'm off the saddle, tucked back behind it. Dropper post is, doing its job with the seat out of the way. And I can see where it's useful for instances like this. I don't think you'd probably encounter those situations too much on, let's say, a gravel event or a actual gravel road. But if you do like to mix it up on single track where it gets steep and a little bit technical, then it makes sense. Right, so we're nearing the end of the single track section, and we're going to join up with some double track that I'm going to ride back home. And this is when things get a little bit silly, because I think in this instance, front suspension is definitely overkill. Do you need front suspension to ride this kind of double track? Definitely not. But I will say this, by having it. This is probably the quickest I've descended this section on any bike. It definitely smoothed out the bumps. The disc brakes really gave lots of confidence, and that got me thinking, who is this bike for? Is it for a mountain biker? Is it for a gravel cyclist? I think because of the front suspension, it does make descending feel a lot more confident. So I would say if you're just getting into gravel, maybe you're a timid descender and you need all the help that you can get to really kind of give you that confidence, smooth out those bumps, then this bike would be awesome for that. I think this would also be great for bike packing if the route you're doing does involve either trail sections, but it's mostly double track, or if you're going to be on a Jeep road and the roads are going to be super rutted and there's going to be baby heads all over the place, then this bike makes perfect sense for that. I was trying to think of what bike this reminds me the most of, and I would say its closest analog to me would be something like the Salsa Cutthroat, at least in ethos. So the Salsa Cutthroat is, they call it a drop bar mountain bike, and it definitely feels like that in some ways. Bombtrack fully admits that this was 90s mountain bike inspired, and it definitely feels like that. Where it differs from the Cutthroat is, first, aside from the front fork, although you can get a Cutthroat with front suspension, this bike comes stock with it in its only offering. I'd also say the geometry is actually a fair amount different. The rear chainstay on the Cutthroat is fairly long. I want to say it's like 445, 450 in that ballpark, and this is fairly short. So if you want a bike like the Cutthroat, but you want it to be, for lack of better words, a little bit racier, a little bit quicker, more responsive, then this is actually this would be a good choice. I think the Cutthroat is a better comparison to this bike than this bike compared to the Warbird. For me, I think that the DNA is definitely more mountain biking than just a beefed up road bike or a beefed up cross bike or a gravel bike as we know it now. And yeah, I think it's kind of unfortunate with some of the marketing that they tried to create a term called hyper gravel. Like, what does that mean? If they just pitched it as a drop bar mountain bike or a super rugged off-road bike packing bike, then it would make sense. I think for most people that ride gravel or do gravel events like Dirty Kansas, this would be way overkill. It might actually be more of a liability given the weight and everything. It would be too much. But if you're exploring, if you want to kind of underbike some technical mountain bike trails, then this bike makes sense. I will add that, I don't think this should be your only bike. I don't think this should be your first bike or even your second bike. You should compartmentalize this as kind of like your fun, wacky Franken bike. There I was just about to drop into a little chute, and there was another rider coming up, so I peeled off at the last minute. Okay, so overall, I've been on this ride. I enjoyed this bike more than I thought I would. Again, trying to keep an open mind, trying to figure out where this bike lays in the spectrum. And I think I'm going to end the video here. So again, this is not a full-on review, but literally my first kind of real ride with the bike. Wanted to capture my impressions, share it with you guys. I have these bikes for a couple weeks, so I figured it'd be fun to do more than just one final ride review video. So yeah, that's it. Let me know what you guys think of this bike. Leave those in the comments below. And as always, keep that supple side down.